Scott, you have been leading field leaders for some time now, and I've heard you say on occasion just how hard it is. Why do you think that is?
I think it's a combination of lack of confidence or lack of competence, or a combination. And I think a lot of field leaders will sign up and do leadership. They're eager, they're gung-ho, they feel called to do this, but they don't understand all the complexities that are involved. And so then they get into it, and then they're in over their head, and they don't have the support that they need to help them work through the challenges of every day or every week leadership of a team. And the counter to that is I've seen some people not step up into leadership because they lack the confidence. They've had leaders that they've seen step out and get in over their head and like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that to my teammates, or I don't want to look like a failure. And so then you have the folks that are lacking confidence that should be stepping up, but because they have some character and qualities that would really make them a good leader, but they don't want to, out of fear, they basically don't step up into leading.
Sure, that's really natural. And I think if you think about it, the stakes are really high. People are concerned about other people's eternity. And so that kind of charges the situation in relationships when the stakes are high. And not only that, people are heavily invested. They have sold their possessions. They've told all their friends and family goodbye. They've moved. They've probably learned another language. So the stakes are high. They're heavily invested. And then honestly, most leaders on the field become a field leader because their leader left. And so they haven't really been adequately prepared, and all of a sudden they're thrown into it. And so it is hard. It is just a tough job. But I'm excited that we are seeing this podcast and network created to come alongside and help field leaders. Welcome to the Field Leaders Podcast, a podcast by leaders for leaders. I'm Dr. Bob McNabb, your host, and I'm here with my co-host, Scott Lundy. Scott, we should introduce ourselves in a minute, but I think we should first answer the question, who is this podcast for? Who do we call a field leader? And why do you think a podcast for field leaders is necessary?
Yeah, Bob, I think when we think about what is a field leader, it's someone who is overseeing people in the field. So it's not necessarily the person might be living in their home country, but they're overseeing someone in a cross-cultural environment. So this would be international directors, could be regional directors, country directors, area directors, someone who's a team leader overseer, regardless of what your organization's label is for it. And then there's also the actual team leader. And I would also even include aspiring team leaders, because those we want to help raise up future leaders to be healthy and effective. So that would be who I would say the podcast is for.
Yeah, basically, if you're tasked with leading on the field, we would love to bless you with this and create an environment for you to learn from one another.
Yep.
This podcast is not about us sharing our wisdom.
Right.
It's about us opening up the channels for field leaders to hear from other field leaders. And that's what we hope to bring in every episode.
Yes, sir. And in regards to why do I think a podcast for field leaders is needed, if you just go back to the Lausanne movement, years ago, they commissioned the REMAP study. It's Reducing Missionary Attrition Project. And then later they did a second one. They called it REMAP 2. It's kind of a follow-up. But it was research to look at what is going on with missionary attrition. And of the people that were leaving the field, 71% of the people they surveyed were leaving for what they defined as preventable reasons, meaning we as leaders, people in our industry, could do things to help prevent it. And some things you can't prevent, but 71% of the reason people left the field early, prematurely, was due to preventable reasons. And when they surveyed, the number one reason that they were leaving the field is they could not get along with their teammates. So, and I know, Bob, you've looked into that even further and talked to people that are more in the member care side of things, and you've asked kind of unofficially, hey, is it the teammates or is it the team leader?
I was privileged to have dinner with a couple of people whose job is to debrief people who come off the field. And I said, hey, you're getting to talk with these people. What are you hearing? Why are they coming off the field? And they said, well, it is definitely conflict related. And so I said, well, who is that between? And they said, between team members and team leaders. I wasn't sure if it was between team members or
Right.
whatever. And so I said, that's interesting. Tell me, what have you seen to be the nature of these conflicts? And what they shared was that it's oftentimes around missed expectations. The team member thought that the team leader was going to go out with them and help them and mentor them and be their teammate. And the team leader doesn't feel like they can do that. They have other responsibilities. And so there's a missed expectation. Or the opposite, the team member feels like, why is this person not giving me more freedom? Why don't they just let me go do my thing? It can go both ways on that, or other related issues, how decisions are made. It's just one way or another, it's missed expectations. But when I listened to that, I thought, wow, I think we can help field leaders by getting some of the right conversations going. If we could help stimulate those conversations, a lot of this missed expectations could be stopped before they're started.
Yep.
And so as far as the podcast, we hope that that's one area that we get into. When we'll have a season on team resiliency and individual resiliency will be a part of that. But we also want to hit other topics like team effectiveness. And Scott, you've thought through and been a part of the planning of several of these. What are some that you're excited about us doing?
Yeah, well, definitely team effectiveness. I've done a lot of team formation and trying to send out church planting teams to unreach and engage areas. So that's definitely a passion. But I think when it comes to the leader part of it is helping create learning communities, helping kind of network people and so they can have relationships where they can collaborate. They can try different things. Over time, we've had groups that did these iron on irons, and it's a process where you help kind of peer coaching and stuff like that. But there's other ways to collaborate. And so these are some of the things I'm interested in or excited about. Bob, what about you?
Yeah, I really hope that as we go through the different seasons of the podcast, it's going to stimulate people's desire to talk with others about these episodes and the issues. And so we plan on opening up opportunities for field leaders to join a learning community where they can talk through, all right, how do I specifically apply this in my context? I'm really wrestling with that. I'd like to hear how some other people are doing that. And so I think that's going to be one of the sweet spots or results of this podcast is seeing these learning communities come together where people can mentor each other and peer coach each other. Also, we would love to see some innovation labs launched where we have a identified common problem that leaders are able to come together around solving that common problem. And then as they come beta test and come up with some good solutions, then we want them to come on the podcast and share those with the rest of the community.
Bob, why do you think that a podcast for field leaders is necessary?
Good question. I really hope that the podcast is a springboard to other things. I hope that the podcast will help people connect as we start offering some learning communities. When I say learning community, I mean some online opportunities for people to come together and discuss the content of the podcasts and to learn from one another and grapple with issues like, how do we apply this in our specific context? And then to peer coach one another. Probably the most exciting part about that is to have spaces where people could come and coach each other and learn from one another across organizational boundaries. Oftentimes we go to our regional meetings or our area meetings and it's everyone in our own organization. But these learning communities will be able to be across organizations where we can really learn best practices from one another. So I'm excited about the podcast being a springboard to learning communities. We are also planning on offering some innovation labs or some times where people come together around a common problem and look for solutions and brainstorm and build on each other's ideas and then beta test those. And when we find ones that work, to share those out, use the podcast as a way to communicate out some of the things that we've learned. And then we really want to see a Great Commission community for field leaders develop even more by having regional network gatherings where we can get together face to face and build our relationships and get to know one another and learn from each other face to face, not just over the internet. So I'm excited about those things.
Yeah, Bob, and one thing I want to add to regarding the learning communities across organizations, I think there's been two powerful things I've noticed. One is, you mentioned, if everybody's in the same group, it's almost like they have groupthink. They have their DNA, their culture, and it's hard sometimes for them to break outside the box. And when I've seen people kind of talk to people from other orgs, it's like paradigm shifts start happening. And so I think that's one advantage. And the other is, I've been a little bit surprised at how much some leaders might have fear to talk about issue because they don't want to reveal their weakness, or they don't want to take this to their supervisor because of the impact. But they're willing, as I've consulted with people from multiple organizations. I'm kind of like an independent contractor going around coaching and consulting. And I've been surprised that people will share something with me. And I'm like, well, have you told your leadership? Oh, no, I can't do that. And there's a fear, a hesitancy that they're willing to share with someone where there's not this organizational accountability or concern that they might get in trouble, or they might reveal their hand that they're not ready to reveal. So there is that cross-pollination of groups that I've seen have two huge benefits for people.
Yeah, it can be a safe space where they can first talk about it, but probably be encouraged to go back and talk to their leaders pretty soon.
Yeah, I agree. It is. You do need to have leadership involved. It's not an escape.
That's right.
It's more of a coaching of how to take it to leadership.
Yeah, that's really healthy.
Yep.
Okay, great. Well, Scott, before we get too far into this, we should stop and introduce ourselves just a little bit.
Yeah, sure, Bob. Why don't you go first?
Okay, sure. I grew up in Sarasota, Florida, came to Christ in my senior year of high school, came to Samford University as a new believer, and was really blessed to have someone immediately begin discipling me and help me grow in my relationship with the Lord, help me learn to have quiet times and share my faith and cast a vision for spiritual multiplication. And for 2 years, this guy poured himself into me, took me out, sharing our faith together and having quiet times together, prayer times, worship times. And then another gentleman, actually a fellow named Curtis Tanner, who started Campus Outreach, spent another couple years teaching me about ministry skills and leadership. And so I just feel super blessed to have those men invest in me during those years. A part of that actually was gaining a heart for the nations. And so by the time I graduated from college, I knew I wanted to go and serve among the unreached, but I didn't want to go by myself. And I felt like I needed to grow up and gain some more experience. So I joined the staff of Campus Outreach, went to a little university south of Birmingham, and began having a ministry. And by God's grace, within a couple of years, we saw a team come together. There were 11 of us who began working with internationals and training ourselves for cross-cultural ministry, taking some seminary classes, praying together, getting everybody's support raised. And then in 1990, we launched to Bangkok and spent time learning language. And soon after that, started campus ministry. And not long after that, started planting our first church. And we were in Bangkok 8 years. The team grew. We had national partners that came on. We moved half of the staff up to the northeast part of Thailand, the Isan people, and started campus ministry and church planting there. I began working with professionals for the first time. And after about 10 years in Thailand, I realized, wow, I have finally worked myself out of a job. The guys that we have leading, one in Bangkok and one in Khon Kaen, they're fantastic. They're super competent. They're great leaders. I don't think they need me anymore. And so my wife and I began to pray about what we would do next, perhaps move to a different city in Thailand. We didn't want to leave there. All 3 daughters were born there. We learned language, we had food. We loved being among the unreached. But I came across a question that asks, what makes you pound the table? And in prayer, I felt like the Lord helped me clarify that what made me pound the table then was, we're sharing our faith with people who've never heard every day. And why are there so few of us doing that? And we came out of a wonderful campus ministry, campus outreach. And when we were the first team out, we really thought that as the ministry grew stateside, that we would just flood the nations with well-trained laborers. And honestly, after 10 years, there wasn't a flood. There was a trickle. And the trickle that was going out, no one was going back and sharing, hey, here's the mistakes we made, years 1, 2, 3, 4, and so that made me pound the table. So why aren't there more people coming? And then why are they bound to make the same mistakes we made? And so the Lord used that to change our calling from goers to mobilizers. And I spent, when I should say we. Susan was always co-laboring, and she's a fantastic disciple maker, probably better than me and herself. And she and I, continued raising our kids in the States. I served in a couple of different churches as missions pastor, continued my education, and went to Puerto Rico to help start a missionary training program there, spent a couple years there and seeing a church planted. And then began to realize, man, I really want to see something that can multiply and grow, something leaner and meaner. And came back and was a part of a ministry that was doing that very thing, which later became Launch Global. And I served as the CEO of Launch Global until just a couple years ago. And during that time, I was able to coach field leaders, team leaders in, 4 or 5 different countries, and learned a whole lot about what not to do in leading and coaching other leaders, but also learned a few things to do. So that, and then now, once Launch Global, was up, running, doing well, competent leaders, God had other plans for me. A couple of years ago, I began to sense that God wanted me to not just work with a single organization, but to learn from many organizations and then share back to many organizations what I learned. And really, honestly, it goes back to pounding the table over something that I saw, and that was how hard field leadership is and how field leaders could be blessed by being able to have contact with other field leaders and get connected to mentors and coaches who could help them, because it's hard. So that brings me to now where I'm serving with Missio Nexus, and I should introduce Missio Nexus for those who aren't familiar. We've got 359 at last count, different member organizations, sending organizations, which represent 53,000 staff members. And our hope is to be used by God to minister to the field leaders of those organizations by providing things like this podcast and opportunities for them to learn from one another, innovate together, collaborate together, and build deep relationships.
Great, Bob. Just tell us a little bit about your educational background.
Yeah, sure. As I said, went to Stanford University and studied psychology there and got a minor in religion. And then while I was on the field, I continued to study seminary classes and earned a degree in intercultural studies, and then went on from there to get a doctorate in leadership. But honestly, like all of us, our best learning is from our personal time in the Word and reflecting on our experiences and learning from other practitioners that I'm around. I've learned so much from them.
Yeah, great. Thanks for sharing.
So Scott, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, Bob, I grew up outside of Atlanta, in the suburbs of Atlanta. Went to university, but my growing up years, I went to Southern Baptist Church, so I come from that kind of background. But it wasn't until I was 24, about a year out of university with my engineering degree, that God really impressed upon me the concept of what I now call surrendering to the Lordship of Jesus Christ, and not just saying I believe he died on the cross and got baptized. And that's, at age 24, 1994 is when my life radically changed. And in less than a year, I was moved to a city in the South where some people near me were Campus Outreach alumni, and I got exposure to life on life discipleship. And through that process, got more and more in understanding that's what I need. Not only is that what I need, I want to help others get it. And so I never actually joined Campus Outreach staff. Well, actually, I did years later. But at that stage, I was just a beneficiary, even though it was a college ministry focus and it was after college. But that's where I started learning life on life discipleship, doing that in the singles group at my church. And then eventually did leave the marketplace and go on staff full time at age 31. And started with Campus Outreach and did some work with you. When you mentioned going to Puerto Rico, you had hired me to help with that. So I was down there with you for that part. And then after that, when that program came to a close, I really felt God through some prayer and fasting that God was leading me to something different. And I'd had options with 6 different groups overseas and 5 stateside that wanted me to come, but they were all support raising. So I thought, well, if it's all support raising, what if I raise my support and I can serve them all and just do what I'm really good at, my sweet spots, and not have to take one job and help one group. What if I helped a lot of groups and really focus on my sweet spot? So that's when I started my own nonprofit in 2009. And since then it's been mostly serving others. 12, I did move overseas, 1040 window, restricted access. So I won't be able to talk too much about that. But since 2012, I've been living overseas in that context. And that's where I would say the last 12 years or so, my experience of trying to help leaders grow and lead church planting teams is really, like you mentioned, education is not just about what you study in the books, but there's a lot of time in prayer, mentoring, coaching people, helping people through hard times, and helping people be successful.
Yeah, and it's been great just to watch God's hand on you, lead you to the Middle East, and then that vision of helping many different organizations, just to see God open up doors for you to be able to coach workers who just got to the field, and then for you to continue on to the point that God now has you coaching team leaders and even other higher leadership. So it's really been exciting to watch your journey, and it's fun to get to do this with you.
Yeah, I agree, Bob. It's definitely a blessing. We've known each other over 20 years, and I really appreciate our friendship and your mentorship.
Well, Scott, I think we should explain to our listeners the format that we will be using in our future podcasts. Yeah. And I think we're going to do some things a little different, and hopefully that will be really beneficial as we go forward. But why don't you share some of those?
Well, sure. We're going to have different seasons, of course, and there will be a focus for different seasons. And so some of the things might be fundamentals for a team leader or overseer, or the foundations of a team leader overseer. There's actually be 2 different seasons. And then we'd have
Now, when you say team leader overseer, translate that. What other synonyms would there be for that?
Could be an area leader or a country leader or a regional leader. Different orgs have different names for it. But think of it, if you got a church planting team with a church planting leader, who's the person that's over them, coaching, mentoring, authority?
Great.
Mostly inline authority type roles.
Okay.
So, but hopefully, that's for the team leader overseer type classification. We'll have the same for team leaders, the basics that they need. And so it would be both TLO focused or team lead overseer focused, team leader focused. But we're going to have other aspects as well that we'll be covering: gospel communities, resiliency, team vitality, team effectiveness. What does it mean to be an emotionally healthy field leader? And maybe some cultural issues depending on where things go. But those are, and it's in the coaching, just how do you coach someone? If you're going to be an overseer and you're trying to help a team somewhere, an unreached, unengaged place, how do you coach and consult people that are not right in your same neighborhood?
Right.
Hey, Bob, we should probably introduce to our listeners some of the plans that we have for future seasons, the topics we want to cover. And I know one that's been near and dear to your heart, and it's also dear to me, but this concept of gospel community. You want to explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. This is one that I'm very passionate about because it has made such a difference in my own life. And then I've seen what the impact is in other leaders' lives. And so with field leadership being so hard, if you don't have a good foundation in a gospel community, I mean, field leadership is hard, but it's even harder by yourself.
Yeah.
And so if you can have a community where you don't have to put up masks, you don't have to worry about being vulnerable, being honest, sharing your weaknesses, getting the support that you need, the encouragement that you need, just not being, in the middle of a struggle by yourself, whether that's with a personal issue, your marriage, a teammate, leadership, but just to have a safe community that will speak truth to you, that will share, encouraging words from the gospel. I mean, we all are broken and we all need each other. And so the gospel communities season will be about how field leaders can experience this. It may sound good, but how do I actually, as a field leader, get to experience that? And I was in ministry for over 30 years before anyone gave me the skills to really participate at a heart level in a community like that. I was most of the time just functioned at the rational level. I think many relationships I was in functioned at the rational level. And a lot of times when you do that, there's really deeper heart issues going on and you kind of miss each other because you're talking up here at the rational when really the problem is a heart level that you need to engage in. And so we want to, in this season, not only introduce the need, the importance, and how can you get in one, how can they function, but we want to share some skills that, again, I was in ministry for all those 30 years, had written a book on disciple making, and yet no one had really ever taught me some of these gospel community skills. And so I'm really excited to see those get passed on. I meet on Thursday evenings with a big group of men that breaks up into smaller groups. And it's really great to see these guys share their hearts with one another and build each other up. And so just watching it multiply. And I know, man, field leaders need to be blessed by that.
Yeah. And the gospel community, everybody needs it, but we're going to be talking about it more through the lens of a leader or a leader overseer of some sort.
Yeah, that's right. Because, it can be hard if you have very limited relationships and the person or people that you're trying to do gospel community with are under your authority or they're in authority over you. It just doesn't feel safe at times. And so we want to tackle that. How do you deal with that? And how can you have a really healthy community? So I'm excited for us to dive into that season.
Yeah, and some of the other seasons we're looking at would be the coaching foundations, which I know is about how to do your job, and then also coaching fundamentals. There's two separate things there. Why don't you explain a little bit about the differences and why you think it's important to separate the two?
Coaching foundations or leadership foundations, field leadership foundations, I should say specifically, because I think that's an important distinction to make. There are a lot of good trainings, a lot of good books about leadership. And there's a lot of good podcasts and books about missiology. But it's hard to find people who have mixed those two together and written or taught or started podcasts specifically about leading on the field. And that's kind of an empty space that we're stepping into.
Bob, and we have multiple seasons that we're planning for, and each season kind of having a focus of its own. And so one of them will be Field Leaders Foundations. And I know for me, one of the things I've seen is expectations and having a clear memorandum of understanding or MOU. I had a team that they had some reference in there about how to do conflict resolution, but they didn't specify what method they would use. And so when it came time to the conflict, one group was saying, we want to use John Schindel-Decker's peace pursuit model.
Right.
And someone else was like, I don't know what that is. I can't use it. I've never been trained. In fact, when y'all had the training, you said we didn't need to go. So, I think that's one thing of foundations is figuring out expectations and what should be in a memorandum of understanding. What are some of your thoughts on what the field leaders foundations?
Yeah, you kind of need to have some of those things in place, don't you, before just as foundations.
Yep.
So when you do bump up on it, you're ready to handle it without a lot of drama.
Right.
I think some other foundations that field leaders need to be thinking about would be like margin. And we're going to have a whole episode on margin and what does it look like as a field leader to have margin in your life. Certainly, leaders everywhere need to know about that, but we're going to dive in specifically to what that looks like for field leaders. Another one like that is support systems. If you live in your home country, you've got lifelong friendships around you. You've got potentially grandparents to help with the kids, or brothers and sisters, and a local pastor you can go and visit, or counseling. But you're stripped away of all these support systems, and you really need them when you're living in another culture. You're in relationships where the stakes are high and things are intense. And so what does it look like for a field leader? And so we want to bring in different field leaders' voices, and we want to ask them about the hits and misses and what they've learned in that episode. And just one more example, we've got many more than this, but another example of an episode we're going to do is on the field leaders development plan. How can a field leader be developing as they go? What does the development plan need to look like? And how can you do that without just feeling like it's one more thing that you got to do and you already have so many demands on you? So those are just some examples of things that we will cover under the Field Leaders Foundations. But then we're going to have a whole nother season on Field Leader Fundamentals, and those will be more about how you actually do your job. And so why don't you share about some of the episodes we're going to do there?
Well, some of the episodes would include just asking good questions. Like if you're a coach, you want to draw out certain things that they need to be thinking about that maybe they're not thinking about. So learning how to ask good questions, how to do a field visit. A lot of people think it's just showing up and being nice, but no, there's actually some things you should do beforehand.
Yes.
Some things you should do on the field, and then some things you should do after you leave. But if you don't have a plan, you're going to be missing out a lot of the potential that you could get done in a field visit.
And the leader you're visiting can kind of be a little nervous about, showing up and what are you going to do? What are you going to say? Or, anyways.
Yeah, other things might be, using the Shepherd model of a trusted leader of lead, develop, care is something that I'm very passionate about, as you know. And so, how much of your role and what is needed regarding leading someone, developing, and then caring.
Yeah, that's good. I know so many people have been blessed by that lead, develop, care, and a lot of that will be oozing its way out of these episodes, that model. But I think some of the other fundamentals are things like, how do you recruit? I mean, this is as a former leader of a mobilization ministry, I would have field leaders of all different levels sit down with me at different times and say, how can we get some of your people?
Yep.
And they're constantly like, hey, attrition happened. We've lost some people and we need more. How do we do that? And so that's a real fundamental skill, knowledge that field leaders need to have. And so we want to dive into that and tackle that. And hopefully people will be more equipped as a result of that.
Yeah. And there's also the importance of not just recruiting, but selecting.
Yes.
I had a gentleman I was working with. We were thinking through what does he need to add to his team. He had a medical clinic and he says, I need a nurse. And he started listing all this stuff. And I'm like, but what about Ephesians 4, 11 and 12? Like, tell me who's on your team. That's the apostle, the prophet, evangelist, shepherd, and teacher. And we went through it and I says, okay, you don't have an evangelist on your team. He's like, yeah, you're right. And I said, so I don't want to mention the guy's name, but I said, you don't just need a nurse. You need a nurse that's an evangelist. And it's like this paradigm shift. He's like, oh, yeah. So it's like it helped him narrow down when he's recruiting who he should seriously consider and who maybe that's not the right fit at this time for his team.
Yeah. And I'll say one more thing on this season on leadership fundamentals. I think as I visited and talked with different field leaders, one of the biggest questions they're grappling with is, am I doing the right thing? There's so much available. There's so many different things you could be doing. Should I be doing more personal ministry, or should I be spending more time with this team member? Should I be working on church relations? What? Or
managing my family? How much am I sacrificing my time with my children or my wife? How do I balance the different responsibilities I have in life?
Yeah. Am I doing the right thing? And so that's going to be a whole episode. We're going to, and probably multiple ones, to help open up an opportunity for leaders to speak to one another and learn from each other. It should be very helpful.
Yeah, Bob, I know also this concept of team resilience is pretty important, especially if you talk about missionary attrition. And so I know we want to have a season just for that. Why don't you share a little bit about what we intend for that season?
Yeah, glad to. There's been some good work done on resilience, worker resilience, and there's some podcasts about that subject and some research. All that is great. But in our season, we really want to focus not just on the individual and the individual's resilience. We really want to look at team resiliency and then the resiliency of the work. Will this work still exist 10 years from now? And we also want to look at resiliency of an area and resiliency of a region. We want to look at it from those different angles. Certainly, individual resiliency is important, but the reason that individuals want to be resilient is because they want their work to be resilient. They want their team to be resilient. They want their ministry to be resilient. So we want to look at those different angles on it as well.
Yeah.
Scott, I know that you're really passionate about team effectiveness, and it's been fun to think with you about this season. What are some of the episodes that you think are going to be most helpful to people?
Yeah, Bob, I think just thinking about the concept of team formation and being able to put the right people together and helping define whose roles and how they're wired up and gifted. And then there's also that's like, what do you start with? But then there's the whole, how do you engage your community? How do you create a lasting work so that it can pass on to others, that you can eventually work yourself out of a job?
Right.
That's when you know you're really effective, is when at some point you've realized, hey, I'm more of a hindrance here than a blessing, because they need to be set loose and run with the gospel in their communities. And so, there's all types of different topics we'll cover in that season.
Right. And that's great. And one of the seasons that I'm excited for us to do is the season on team vitality. Certainly, we all want our teams to be effective, but how effective are they going to be if we're not experiencing the type of health at the team level that we all desire and want? And so we're going to dig into what some of the poisons that you can run into are as a team, and then what are some of the healthy practices and how to interact and see a team be really vibrant and for people to enjoy their work. Certainly it's hard work, but we all believe that God wants us to have great joy as we do the work. Yeah. And that involves joy in relationships on the team and not just constant struggle. And so we want to look at issues that will help teams be vibrant and very healthy as they do the work together. So certainly we have other seasons that we want to get into, but I think that gives our listeners a good sample of where we're headed.
Yep. Well, Bob, I know also we've talked about the seasons, but there's also a format we want to go through.
Right.
And I know we're going to introduce a topic and have a question or a problem that in each episode we want people to wrestle with. Why don't you share a little bit more about the format that we'll have?
Yeah, certainly. Once we kind of clarify and define the problem, the first thing we want to do is look at Scripture. Mm-hmm. That's our basis. Ideas and innovations come and go, but Scripture is always our foundation. And so we want to start with that. But then you sometimes, or many times, are left with the question, all right, this is the biblical principle, but how do we apply that in our specific situation? And Scripture's not always super clear on that. And so to wrestle with the application, that's where research can help, is to find out from others who have been through that. And so we want to interview different field leaders and bring their voices into the podcast. And in one podcast, we might have 4, 5, 6 different leaders weigh in on a topic. And I think that's going to be really helpful. Certainly, there'll be times where we have one guest that we interview and they share their experience. But I'm really excited about this idea of having multiple leaders come in and share what they've learned, hits and misses, their failures as well as their successes with the broader community. So that'll be really helpful. I think one of the other things that's going to be very helpful is that we're going to provide a worksheet with most episodes that will help guide the listener through thinking through the application to their particular context and help them reflect on it and take some specific action steps. And so we will have these worksheets, and then we'll have opportunities for leaders to get together online with other leaders and discuss the particular episode and their worksheets. And that will be just another level of learning that people will step into.
Yeah. And hopefully in that also like resources, or here's a book or two that was impactful,
Yes.
or here's a podcast, or here's a training session. So there will be resources by topic as well.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's good. And I know we've talked about the kind of the vibe that we want our podcast to have. And reality is field leadership is hard. And we probably don't have to tell our listeners that. They're experiencing it.
Yep.
But at the same time, we have seen that with good support systems around you, with the right spirit of a teachable learning spirit, we've seen leaders really grow and flourish and make great progress.
Yeah.
And so kind of the vibe we're hoping for is to see this be a place where leaders can come maybe feeling a little beat up and get some potentially really helpful answers and information and wisdom, and walk away or leave the podcast feeling the Spirit of the Lord having encouraged their hearts through that, and having hope and thoughts about new directions that they may head off into. What about you? You've shared that you really desire it to be this way. What are you envisioning?
I'm excited to have just an ongoing resource for people, so they might hear a podcast and, think about it today or whatever, but it may be a year from now that something happens and they really, it's like, man, I need to go back and review that podcast. So there's this library of resources available of different podcast episodes. So I'm really looking at the benefit of resources available going forward for people. And with it being kind of episode specific per topic, you can just pop in exactly what you need. You don't have to figure out what every episode's about. Like guess it's actually going to be specifically targeted episodes.
Right. I think we're to the point now we need to share with our listeners our need to have them help us. Our whole idea here is creating a venue for shared learning. And so we would love to have, to start things off, 50 team members, 50 team leaders, and 50 team leader coaches or overseers to volunteer to be a part of what we're calling our research group. And this group will be a group of people who have volunteered to answer brief surveys that we will then be able to come back and share on the podcast answers so that others can learn from their wisdom. And we want to bring in some stories from the 50 team members, 50 team leaders, and 50 team leader coaches. And so that doesn't have to be complicated. That doesn't have to be a whole interview. It can be someone using Signal or WhatsApp and sharing a story with us through a voice message that we can integrate into the podcast. And so we're going to have a link that you can sign up to be a part of this research group and get the shared learning kicked off.
Yep. And also there will be a place if there's a specific need that you feel like you would like to have us address, and we get enough people saying, hey, we really need to make sure we get that. Or we could say, hey, yes, we've got that on our outline. It's going to, season whatever with episode, that's our target for that particular topic. So.
Yeah. And I think we're not 100% chained to the seasons. If we have some great opportunity to bring in, I think about one of the field leaders I talked to recently who had done some good research and come to some really helpful findings that a lot of field leaders would benefit from. And, we may have to have a one-off episode just to let that researcher and practitioner come in, share, and let's get it out there.
Yep.
And so if you fall in the category where you feel like you've got something that is kind of breakthrough, or that the Lord's really laid on your heart that you would like to share with the broader community, shoot us a message and let us know. And we'd love to help provide a platform for you to share that. All right. I actually have a good reason for asking you to do that. And that is that this is episode 0, but we're not 100% sure when we're going to be ready to start with episode 1, 2, 3, 4. And so we are asking you to subscribe so that you'll get a message letting you know that we've started. After that, we hope that we can have an episode out about every other week and run for a season, and then we'll have a break. And so to give us time to do some further research and get ready for the next season. And so it's important that people are subscribed so that they know when the next season starts back up again. Yep. Yeah. So if you wouldn't mind, go ahead and hit subscribe and let the field leaders that are beside you, below you, above you know about it as well, so that we can have more people speaking into the larger conversation. Well, I guess that does it for episode 0. Please feel free to use the comment section below to share with us any type of ideas or questions or encouragements that you have. We'd love to hear from you. This has been an episode of the Field Leaders Podcast from the ministry of Missio Nexus and our hearts, which is to see field leaders connect, learn, and collaborate. God bless.